So the Nilgiri Plateau is, and the Nilgiris is in South India, and this is the shape of the Nilgiri Plateau, as you can see. It's a perfect plateau in many ways, and it's like elevated to about 1,700 meters, and it's uniform throughout most of the plateau. And you have a lot of undulations and peaks and ranges within it, but overall it has an elevation of 1,700 meters, and it goes up to 2,800 meters. So this entire Nilgiris is, I call it like a microcosm of Earth, because it's got a huge amount of diversity in terms of vegetation types. So one of the first things that we have to do as ecologists and people wanting to get into restoration ecology is to understand the native ecology of that place. So the Nilgiris, in that sense, like offers everything, because it has rainforests in the western part, as you can see, and it has moist deciduous forests in the northern parts, and it has dry deciduous forests, and then it has scrub jungle and dry savanna type vegetation as well, towards the rain shadow and towards the northeast parts. And then it has this special vegetation called the Shola grassland ecology, which occurs on top of the plateau. And then there's another vegetation type called the hills forests, which occur along the slopes of the massif. So this is a drawing I made of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve and how it would have been before a lot of the changes and destruction happened to this place. So yeah. So I have been working in the plateau. So the region that's about 1,700 meters and 2,000 meters and goes up to 2,800 meters. So the entire plateau was covered by this ecology called the Shola grassland ecology. And as you can see here, it's a mosaic of grasslands and these dense evergreen forests, they call Shola forests, which occur in patches. So Shola forests are naturally confined forests. So forests all over the world are cut down and chopped, and because of man-made pressures, they are confined. But Shola forests are naturally confined, and this is because of various factors such as moisture, frost, and exposure to sunlight and an aspect, and several reasons like that. And then all the other spaces is covered by these montane grasslands. So here's another image of how the Shola and grasslands occur. And this is another image also. And as you can see, the folds and valleys have the dense Shola forests, and all the other places are covered by grassland. So here's another image which also shows the same thing. And so together, this landscape is incredibly beautiful. It looks really like out of the world. And this itself is a very aesthetic feature that that people really want to come and see and witness, because it's not very common in for the vegetation to occur like this, where two very distinct types of vegetation types occur in a mosaic. So 70% of the plateau would have been grasslands and 30% would have been sholas. So the first image I showed you of the map, about 70% would have been covered by grasslands and 30% would have been shola forests. So here's an image of the grasslands and how they occur. And this is from a place where the grasslands still remain. So the entire plateau would have looked something like this. So the Shola forest has about 90 species of trees and it has about 450 species of plants. So like in the previous talks, when the other experts and practitioners were also saying, it's really important to understand and know the species, the native species and the native ecology, and try and understand the benchmark of what was there in the landscape before. So when it comes to that, it's really important in trying to understand how many species of trees, how many species of plants, and how the community grows and occurs together. Like in this image, you can see that there's an understory, there's a middle story, and then there's an upper story to the forest, Shola forest. And this is an old growth Shola forest. So the tree there must be over 500 years old, and and the number of mosses and epiphytes and all other plants that make up a Shola community, it takes a lot of time for it to become like this. So time is also something that we have to understand and factor in when we're trying to get into restoration. So these are just some of the inhabitants of Sholas, and especially when you old growth Shola forests, these are called balanophora. These are fungi that grow they're like root parasites. So this is a rare flower. It's called an Impatiens monronia. It's endemic just to the Shola forests. So here's a tree fern, and these tree ferns grow in the Shola forests. And so about 300 million years ago, like most of the forests were made of like tree ferns, and there weren't many trees, and the forest itself were made of tree ferns. So these are like relics almost, the Shola forest, because they still have these tree ferns because they're cold and moist. So they allow for these ancient plants also to survive. So this is a fungi that's growing in the forest also. It's called um, orange cup fairy fungi. And here you can see the way the Shola trees grow, and they are you wouldn't call them very straight or tall growing. The branches are very craggly uh, and wavery. And as you can see, there's a monkey that's endemic to this forest type, which is called the Nilgiri langur. So we just saw that the Shola forest has about 450 species, and the grassland has about 650 species. And this is what studies show. So the grasslands actually have more number of species than Shola forests. And this plant you see here, it's called the golden Kurunji. And you might have heard of the Kurunji because it's very famous. It's famous because it flowers only once in 12 years, and and it covers entire hill slopes. This color, But this is the golden Kurinji. It's another species of Kurinji, which is even more, it's like extremely rare, endemic to just one part of the Nilgiris. And the stalks turn golden and when it flowers. So it's an extremely beautiful plant. So here are some inhabitants of the grasslands. This is an orchid. This is a plant that's it's called a gentian, and it's related to Himalayan species, and a lot of the Himalayan varieties are found here. They came here during the last ice age. They moved from the north. These are impatiens. They're special to this region. They're a type of wild balsams, and there are many species of impatiens that are native and endemic to this place. So this is how the impatiens and all other flowering plants grow in the grassland. So the grasses are made of tussock grasses. So these are grasses that grow as bunches and they don't spread like a mat. So in between the grasses, there can be a lot of other plants that can grow. So this is how they flower and they grow. So this, of course, is the famous Neela Kurinji, and the name of the hills come from this plant also, Nilgiris, and it flowers once in 12 years, and it needs the grassland ecology. So the Neela Kurinji can only grow where grasslands still remain, and yeah, this was about 3 years back when the last flowering happened. So we got 9 years more to go. So, however, less than 10% of the Shola grassland ecology remains now. And the grasslands, especially, were displaced to form tea estates and farmlands. And then settlements came up. And then they were seen as wastelands and planted with exotic trees. So, trees that were not native to this place. So, if you remember the map that I showed you initially of the plateau, and this is a map, like a land use map of the same now. And all the gray that you see is all tea plantations and vegetable farming and urban setups. So most of the plateau is completely changed. And then all the blue that you see is exotic tree plantations. So mostly plantations of trees from Australia, which is acacia and eucalyptus. And then the yellow patches are the only places where shola and grassland mosaic still remains. And then the green patches are patches where like either large shola forests or just shola forests that are remain by themselves, not along with grassland. So this is an image that many people see of the Nilgiris, and but actually it masks a lot of ecological damage, and most of the green you see is exotic tree plantations, and then even this reservoir that's been created is artificial, and it's been created by submerging a lot of important wetlands which have a lot of species. And then the tea estates, like I was telling you, tea plantations have really reached the edge of the plateau. And there you can see in the background is some grasslands remaining right at the edge of the plateau. So there are a huge number of exotic species here, invasive, that are invasive. And they were initially brought as ornamentals by the Europeans and by the British. So this is a plant that's from the UK. It's called BOS, and then it was brought here because the British felt homesick and they wanted the Nilgiris to look like England. And this is another plant called Eupatorium. It's from Central America. And this is also considered a big invasive species. So the Nilgiris has a huge issue with invasive species. We have invasive grasses from Africa. We have about 20 different invasive species from Central America, and several invasive species from Australia and from Europe. There are plants from US and Mexico and all over the world. So we almost have like an entire complex of plants and trees and shrubs and grasses, which are also like very diverse. That's made like a replacement ecology almost, and they probably outnumber in terms of the number of plants. They totally outnumber the native ecology, and probably the most abundant plant in the Nilgiris might be tea, then an invasive grass from Africa, and then probably the trees from Australia. So how did this all start for me, and how did I come to this landscape and start this work? So I was born here. I am from the Nilgiris, and then I studied in a school called Krishnamurti Foundation in Chennai, and there nature education was given a lot of importance. And so I used to come back to the Nilgiris every year, and I really liked the Nilgiris and loved the forests. And before even I had an understanding of ecology and environment, I knew that I knew things like I knew the boundary between where a forest ended and then where the rest of the plains and rest of the landscape started. So since I was pretty small, I wanted to extend that boundary, and that's how it started. And school education played a big part. And then as Pradeep was also saying, I took part in a course where we studied ecology and landscapes, and trying to understand the issues that they're facing and pressures that they're facing. And you can also see one of the practitioners who's going to be speaking next, Suprabha, is also there in that photo. And we were looking at mountain landscapes and Shola grassland ecosystems in different parts. And then I came back to the Nilgiris and I wanted to learn more and more about the ecology, and I spent a couple of years learning the species and trying to find out like whether it's possible to grow these back and how to go about it. So my first restoration site actually started long back when I was in school itself, and it happened in the deciduous forest region. So like I told you, the Nilgiris has all the forest types. Most of the forest types you can find in most parts of India. So it started with the deciduous forests, and at that time when I was in school, I really loved the Mudumalai forests, and it was like my favorite place on earth because of the wildlife and because of the ecology also. So it started like when my father had bought about 5 acres there in Mudumalai and adjoining Mudumalai, and then when we were in school, like I still remember convincing him that we should not do anything there and not build a resort or anything like that, because many people were doing that. And So that was like a passive restoration almost, like where we left the land and it was degraded because it was a farmland before, and then slowly the trees started coming back and the bamboo started coming back, and we just used to go and visit. We planted some amla trees and some bamboo which have all grown back, and so that has become almost 20 years now, and yeah, it's always wonderful to go and visit that spot again. So when I came back here, I um, initially worked with restoration where we were removing invasive species. So like I was saying, the Nilgiris has a huge number of invasive species, and in order to protect some of the last remaining grasslands, we had to do that. Um, we had to go to these places where new invasions were starting, and we used to remove the plants. And then I also found out that the grasslands and the grasses were not spreading by themselves, um, and then something had to be done, like just removing the invasives, which was also very important, was not enough because the grasses weren't spreading by themselves, and the grasslands weren't expanding; they were just shrinking. So, which is when I got some support for starting a nursery, and I started the first grassland nursery in the Nilgiris. And I focused a lot on the grasses, but then I also was growing shrubs and shola trees. So it's an entire, like, try to grow the entire set of plants. But then, yes, I focused a lot on the grasses. So here are some images of the nursery setups, including wetland species and wetland grasses that we try to grow. And yeah, so I had to grow them. Initially collected plants from where they remain, and then try to grow them from seeds. So it was an entire learning process because I had to see which species grew from seeds and which species weren't flowering and seeding, and try to find out methods of growing them. And they all needed different types of shade, and so all those had to be set up. So yeah. So I also focused on the on a niche called the edge between the forest and the grassland, because the edge between a forest and grassland is composed of several species, like a lot of shrubs and species, which it has a huge amount of diversity, and they are the ones that also respond to disturbances and are able to shift between a grassland and a shola forest. So over time, I understood that it was better to focus on the edge species because it was actually difficult to grow trees, just trees by themselves, because of the conditions here, frost and uh, and the dry season and herbivory, because a lot of the trees were being eaten up by animals that we planted, and then grasses, of course, because of herbivory and invasive species. So then I found out that the edge species and the shrubs did better against invasive species and herbivory. So I'll talk to you about one of the projects that I started off, one of the first projects I started off. And this was in collaboration with other practitioners who's going to talk next also. And so the design and the landscape design was all done by them. And so this whole design involved a lot of including native plants into it. And the reason why I'll talk about this project is because it involves a lot of landscape design, and it might be interesting for landscape architects. And yeah, so this is an example, like a plan that's made for this project. Is about 50 acres, and it is ongoing. Like there was a huge gap of 3-4 years because of permission issues in this project, permissions for construction. Because of that, the project has been delayed, but the planting had started, and a lot of the trees and plants that we planted there have grown. And since it was one of my earlier projects, like I got to practice a lot of the techniques and learned quite a bit while practicing. So so as you can see, as you saw the plan, it had a lot of like pathways and roads, and because the idea was to get people to come and experience the whatever we were planting, and it included a lot of native plants. And it was a project, a commercial project, if you can say, because it belonged to a company, and they wanted to like make a resort out of it. So they initially they came with a plan of.
So you got you left unmute. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, very well.
Where did I sleep? Where did I go?
It was a commercial project in this.
Yeah. So initially the company just wanted to make a normal ornamental garden, like all the other gardens that you see in the Nilgiris, which are like these English gardens, and like with lawns and flowers and everything. So we had a lot of like working with them and convincing to try and get the native plants and a lot of the native ecology in. So there were some compromises we had to make also, which is like to include a lot of the exotic and flowering plants, and sorry, all plants, exotic and showy plants. So so yeah, so we had all these different elements, and we started off by um, making the fence, and started making the pathways, and pathways are important because uh, while working also you need to have access to go and plant, and for everything, for manuring, taking care of the plants, and documenting, and for everything. So one of the first things we do is to lay out the pathways. Okay. So as I said, like the whole of the Nilgiris has a huge number of herbivores, like large bison and samba, and wild boar, um, and smaller deer. So that was one of our main challenges. Um, so one of the things we started off with is to create a solar electric fence, and solar electric fence is not it's not dangerous because the voltage is less, and it just deters the animal. So it's recommended to have it like probably for 2 to 3 years, until like the plants grow and they reach a certain height, and after that it can be removed. So over here, it initially started with a lot of removing the exotic and invasive plants. And over here in this image, it's a lot of Asia, the Australian wattle, which is an invasive species. So, yeah. And then there was a lot of tea on the land also. So we had to, we manually like uprooted the tea, because we didn't want the roots to regenerate, and then there was a lot of landscaping involved also, such as maintaining the slopes and pathways and everything. So we did everything manually. And one of the important things with planting is also is the irrigation and watering aspect. So one of the main things we did initially was to create a collection pond at a point that's high up in the land, so that we can gravity feed all the plants that we're planting below. So planting Shola trees was also challenging because there are many conditions that they have to fight against, and the things like frost and high winds and cold temperatures are very challenging here, which is why like Shola forests, they are very important, because the mother trees, they form a microclimate, and then they shade the young trees from all the elements, and which is how they're able to grow. But then when you're growing a Shola forest from scratch, you don't have these conditions, you don't have the mother trees there. So so which is why we need to offer the protection and shade from excess wind and frost. So we had to innovate and find ways of doing that, and we made tree guards out of these exotic trees that we're cutting, and then we also made a shade using another exotic invasive plant called broom, and then we put it around the trees and to make a guard out of it. And then this turned out to be very good, and the tree started growing well in that. We did try other methods also, like in Europe and all that. There are these tree tubes that they make, and this is a kind of a narrow tube which allows the trees to grow quicker, because it's narrow and tall, and so and the light comes from above. So the idea is that the tree might grow slender, but then it'll grow quicker and come out. But those kind of methods didn't work, and we found out that this natural method of using wood and the other in exotic plant worked out best. So there were many elements to the land, such as the stream and a wetland. So along with the tree planting, we also did the wetland restoration. And here you can see is a type of endemic and rare sedge that we planted. So there are a lot of endemic plants in the Nilgiris, and they all require different niches. So one special niche is the niche that's next to rocks, and there were several rocks in this place. So we planted the plants that really like to grow along the rocks, which is this golden kurunji, which I showed you an image of before, and then another endemic plant called Anaphyllus nilgiriana, which is also a really beautiful plant, and it grows next to rocks. So here there are images of these plants that I grew in my nursery, and then took it to this spot and planted it next to the rocks, and they've all grown and flowered also. So here's an example of like implementing the design and creating these like in the natural setting, there would be no steps, and it would all be a slope, and that's how we would restore. But then because this was being designed as a park a showcase for a lot of people. We had to make it in such a way that it's easier for people to walk, and it's easier for them to see the plants. And so we created these steps, and then while clearing also, we made sure we left all the native species. So the bushes that you see here that are left there are all native species that have been left and then prepared for planting. So another important part of the work was in restoring the streams and the waterways in this land. And so because this whole place was, the whole entire watershed was dominated by tea plantations are very susceptible for soil erosion. And so all the waterways and streams get clogged and covered by a huge amount of soil and silt. So one of the first things to do before while for restoring a stream is to try and remove that silt, because in a natural setting, every stream here in the mountains in the Nilgiris will be lined with rocks, and whether it's in a grassland or in a shola. So so it's important we reach that layer where the rocks are there, and so we had a lot of manually clearing to do, and until we reached the rocks. And aesthetically also, it's very beautiful if the rocks are there. It's one is the flow of the stream itself won't appear outside unless you reach the layer of the rocks, because if you're just having soil on top, the stream will continue to flow underground, or only when it's the monsoon or when there's a lot of rain will it start appearing outside. So and from an aesthetic point of view also, the stream and the feature that it had to be there and flowing all the time was very important for this whole project. So yeah, we had to remove the silt and reach this layer where all the rocks were there. And so you can see a before and after image. And over time, once the planting happened, we started removing the invasive species. The water also started the water table started to improve, and we got more water in the stream. And then a lot of the native species also started coming back. So in this image, you can see the plant with the white flowers. It's an endemic impatiens, and that started coming back and flowering and growing by its own actually. And we didn't even plant it, and it was endemic to that region. So places next to streams and wetlands, what I've observed is that when you give that space and remove the main obstacles, the speed at which natural regeneration happens and the speed at which native plants come back is very fast. So here are just some images of how we plant and regeneration. So this was the grasses that we planted, and then the tussock grass is growing, and then they're flowering also. So they're actually quite very ornamental, and when they flower, they completely turn pink, as you can see in this image. This is one species of grass. And here are the shola trees that were planted and are growing. And so the image on the left is a shola tree. It's called Mahonia leschenontii, and again, this species is related to other species that grow in the Himalayas and in the northern hemisphere. And these are new leaves of the tree. And then on the right is an image of one of the tallest trees now. And in fact, this photo was taken about 3 years back. So right now, like this tree is over 20 feet high. So that's the height of some of the tallest trees that we planted. So here's an image of our team that worked on this land, and yeah, so we had a lot of people from the local um, village who came and worked, and we did most of it, everything manually. We didn't use, we hardly used any machinery, and including the pathways and digging out the tea, which is sometimes the roots are even uh, harder than trees because they've been pruned for so many years, and yeah, so it involved a lot of hard work and labor. So I'll just go back to the Shola and grassland ecology, and one of the and how we portray the importance of it to convince people to want to plant it. So one is just the aesthetic aspect of it. You can see that it's incredibly beautiful, and the colors of the Shola canopy and the diversity is incredibly beautiful. So when people get to know this and more people understand this, they really are interested and want to grow it back. And then there is also this the other aspects of hydrology and ecological services, as they call. So this is also very important to understand when trying to speak to stakeholders and get them to want to have the native plants. So the Shola forests are like incredibly adapted um, to the local conditions um, and for producing these perennial streams and rivers and maintaining a microclimate and uh, and remaining stable over centuries. So many factors such as like low evapotranspiration rates and slow growth rates help in this. Although like there's a huge amount of rain that gets incident in these places, most of the water is let into the streams and wetlands and let downstream. So all of this is made possible because of these growth characteristics of the plants here. And the Shola forests are also called cloud forests because they're frequented by mists and fog. And studies show that they also sequester a lot of moisture from the cloud and fog. And sometimes it could be even more than the amount of moisture that comes from rain. So Shola trees are completely covered with mosses and other bryophytes and epiphytes. And what this does is this increases the surface area and for moisture to collect and condense. And this way, much more moisture and water is retained in the forest, and then makes its way to the streams and the water cycle. And then when it comes to absorbing water, though, the grasslands play a very big role, so maybe a bigger role because they cover a much bigger area. So the roots of the grasses are are extremely well adapted and have co-evolved almost with these mountains and the soils. And because of the cold climate and because of other aspects such as the origin of these soils, there is a special layer of like black soil over here, which is very high in carbon, and this stores water like a sponge, and then slow. This is what helps like store water in huge quantities and then slowly release it throughout the year. And it's almost like I call them biological glaciers, the shola and the grassland ecosystem, because it's because of the ability to store huge amounts of water and slowly release it. So these kind of aspects, when we start communicating to local administration and to schools and to young people, young children, and they are, it's more of much more of an interest is developed and an incentive for wanting to plant the native ecology. So as you can see in this image, yeah, many wildlife depend on the native ecology and the grasslands, such as the Nilgiri that's there in this image. And then you can see a stream that's coming off the edge, and that's coming from a small shola patch, and then the grassland around it. So even such a small region can produce such a big stream, and then you can imagine how the whole of the Nilgiris would have been, like thousands of streams and water bodies and rivers coming out. So this is what I try and communicate with the various stakeholders here about the potential and the need for restoring the soil and the association with the native ecology. And that's one a big reason why a lot of people are interested in growing the native ecology back. So as I was saying, like it involves a lot of going to people and speaking to them about the properties and helping them set up nurseries also. And then, of course, communicating this with children, and they obviously understand all of this and excited about this. So, and they love to plant it wherever possible. So this one is a bit about an education and school project where it was more of just ecological restoration. And again, it started with the importance of growing the grasslands back and the native ecology back. And then it starts with creating a map and marking out where we want to grow the native grasses, and then preparing the land and then getting the children involved. So the entire land was covered by this invasive species from Central America, which is called cestrum, and it's quite a large bush, and it grows very densely and displaces most of the native vegetation. So initially, like, we had to use a tractor over here because it was impossible to do it manually in the time frame that we had. So we had to use a tractor, and then had to um, dispose of them and burn them and give them firewood. So that was one of the initial things we did, processes. And sorry. Yeah, so here's an image of how it was, and now the grasslands that they've come back. And so it involved a lot of care from students coming and de-weeding. And so if you can see in the before image, there is still a lot of the cestrum bushes in the back, and then the grass that you see there is an invasive species from Africa. So we had to remove all of that and then plant the native grasses, which have then grown back over here. And so in the previous image, sorry, in the previous image, we had, this shows like the a round of de-weeding that we had to do also, because the invasive species come back again even after planting. And so Along with the students, I also took other volunteers, and I also went and worked on the land quite a bit over here. So that was another type of project, a restoration project. And then I also try and encourage people to grow native species wherever possible. And even people who have 1 acre of land or 50 cents of land or even smaller. And so this is a project where there was a lot of landscaping happening, and there were landscape architects involved, and then there was a design, and then that was being implemented. But then we also worked along to try and include native species in it. So there was a part of the land which was a high slope area, and then the idea was to make that into a small shola forest, and also have the species that can hold the soil really well, because the slope was really high there. So that was also one of the reasons why people want to have the native species, is because of the function of holding the slope together. And as you can see, the trees have been planted, and they're growing well also. So here's another example of slope retention and slope stabilization. So we're planting the native grasses, which are probably one of the best, along with some of the shrubs such as the Nilgiris. And we've taken up several projects where we work on slope stabilization along roads and along reservoir bunds, and in high slope areas of people's houses and institutions. So there have also been projects where I have worked on only planting native species for people who are really interested and want to grow the native species back in small areas around the houses. So this is an example of a simple plan that I make. I'm not a landscape architect, so so I don't go into detailed designs in that way. If I need to, then I work with designers and landscape architects to do that. So this is a simple plan that I made. So you can see it involves tussock grasses, it involves bamboos, the native bamboos, flowering shrubs, and fruiting shrubs, and the Kurinji species, and trees, and so a bit of everything, but in a small patch. So as I was saying, the aesthetics and the fact that the Shola forest grasses are very beautiful is another selling point, if you can say that, to get people to plant the native species. And as you can see in this image, the trees planted out are already like starting to put out their colors. The new leaves are starting to bring out their colors. And so once this is done in a certain patch and people see it, they want it, more people want it, and that's how it keeps spreading. So here's another project, a small project that was done in a house, and then it's only about 30 cents of land. And then that's the before image. It was completely covered with this exotic grass, and the soil was extremely compacted. And the people living there and who took interest in doing this were very keen, and they also worked on the land a lot. And it was, this project was only possible because the owners and the people who wanted to do it was so involved in it, and so within a year, the grasses have grown back, and then the ferns are growing. We planted a lot of shola trees also in the back where there is shade, and a lot of Kurinji species also. So as you can see, the tussock grasses that have grown back, there are quite a few species in this. One of them is endemic also to this place. And yeah. So this is an image over here where this dry season, the tussock grasses have been cut, and this helps mimic what's happening in nature when they get either burned or they get eaten by herbivores. So it's important to cut off all the dry matter, because this place is not open to herbivores coming or like susceptible to fire, because it's in a house. And so we had to mimic this. And as you can see, even cutting them and um, making these is also very aesthetic, and is something um, might be a useful thing for landscaping. So it's also important to try and showcase the native ecology wherever possible, so that people look at it and want to have it in their houses and homes and wherever possible. So this is a fountain in a school that we made, and a small stream. So we planted the native plants and ecology and grasses just around it to showcase just a small patch to showcase the aesthetic value of it, um, and the fact that it can be done in very small places, even if you have a small place also. And there's actually quite a few Kurinji species and fruiting shrubs and the grasses that have been planted around. And on the left is again these native grasses that have been planted in an important premises in the Nilgiris. It's an heritage library, and a lot of people come there. So the grasses have grown there now, and a lot of people are seeing it and then interested in it and want to grow it in their places also. So and then on the right is an example of native species growing along with many other ornamental species. And so this is a project that was done in a five-star hotel here in a Taj premises. So the landscaping and everything was done by other people, but then I just gave the native plants. So I didn't have a say on how many native plants should be planted or where they should be planted. But then the landscape architect used the plants to um, plant it wherever they felt like. So here are just some images of them. So the purple flower that you see is a native shrub. It's an Osbeckia, which is growing along with the Korean grass lawn and the other species that you see there. And this is also in that same property. And you can see the native grasses are being showcased, this is somewhere near the entrance of the entire property. And they've been um, planted along with other shrubs, and they're flowering now. There are different species here. It's called Chrysopogon, Heteropogon, and Themida. Sorry, Tripogon and Themida. And some of these species really like to grow next to rocks, and that's what they've also tried to emulate here. And the yellow flower you see is a crotalaria, and that's growing next to other species like salvia and other plants. And the crotalaria brings in a lot of bees and butterflies also. And here is that golden Kurinji, which was planted and flowered in sync with the flowering that happened in the wild also. Yeah, here's another picture of the Osbeckia that's growing along with the other plants in this property. And there's a native succulent which is growing in the succulent garden, and this native succulent is also endemic to this Shola grasslands, and it's very rare. So yeah, it's gotten the space to grow in this place. So everything helps in increasing the numbers of native plants. So I just like to end with some other aspects and dynamics that are happening to the ecology here. And so I would like to say that yes, it's really important that we make the space for native vegetation and make our interventions of planting them out and growing them and creating these nurseries and working with solutions um, where it really doesn't matter like whether it's just purely native species or not, but just giving the space wherever wanted. But then we also have to be aware that there are massive changes happening globally, and native species and forests are declining at a very rapid pace. And this is an image um, of a landslide that happened and recently about 2 years back, and climate change is causing a huge amount of damage. And so it's also important to keep a track of what's happening to the native ecology in places where um, ecology still remains, and and work towards stopping that also, because we can try and create our our interventions and spaces of growing them back. But then when the damage happens, it's much bigger than the places that we can affect. So I feel this is also really important that everyone, landscape architects or students interested in nature and ecology and environmentalists and ecologists should also um, all concentrate on and look at. So yeah, so this is what I try to do in with my setup. It's called Upstream Ecology, and it's about working at the plant ecology level and working with restoration, but also looking at holistic issues and problems and solutions, so that yeah, we can create a true and effective change. And yeah, I've written about a lot of this in my book also. It's called Voice of a Sentient Highland, and more about like various important aspects that we can learn from nature, and yeah, so if you're interested, do take a look at the book also. And yeah, so I will end the presentation now.
Thank you. Thank you, Vasant sir. It was a really a eye-opener and quite alarming to know the percentage of forest left now. It was so now I would request everyone to drop in their questions in the chat box, and we take them one by one. So while the questions are dropping in, I have a question to start with this time. Could you just tell us a little more about the fauna diversity in the grasslands, and if their intervention help the grasses grow, or to what degree?
Okay, so the faunal diversity is very high, and both in terms of diversity and numbers also. So there are a lot of um, ungulates and bovines, and so there's deer, the samba deer, um, and bison and elephants come up also, and then there's the Nilgiri tar, which is endemic to this place. and all of them depend on the grasslands. And yeah, like grazing does um, help maintain the grasslands, but that's not one of the main factors which determines the presence of the grasslands. Um, in fact, the fact that the grasslands occur and that they provide so much fodder is the reason why all these animals live here also.
Okay,
Can I
thank you so much. There's a
can I
question from Mr. Vijay. I would request him to ask his question directly.
can I just jump in
Sure.
before Vijay for 1 second?
Sure, sure, sure.
Um, Vasant, thank you very much. I'm the predominant feeling I'm getting after your talk is one of great sadness because of the fact that the Nilgiris look so amazing, so absolutely. I mean, what a terrific ecosystem, and to think that we, as a country or as a civilization, we seem to have no regard at all for how important and how gorgeous this place is. I mean, anywhere else, I think in the world, this place would be carefully conserved and beautifully sort of set apart, but and not just given to tea to ravage in the way that happens. So it's a very, very eye-opening and a sad thing. And so I have two questions. One is, what is the attitude of agencies like the Forest Department, which clearly have the potential to play a huge role in conservation here? That's one. And I'm also very curious to know why why it is that this ecosystem is as fragile as it is. It seems to cave in with every invader that happens to appear. I mean, what is it that gives it no resilience whatsoever? I'm wondering whether Suprabha also can join into this discussion because I'm sure she has a point of view as well. So, Supi, if you can also just unmute yourself and join in.
Yeah, so I think I'll try and answer the first question and then the second question, and then maybe when Supi has something, she can join in, right? Cool. So the forest department is is still like very backward in its approach. And in fact, we just had a series of discussions and talks where the Supreme Court was trying to mediate between the forest department and a set of an expert committee which I'm also part of. And even with the Supreme Court there, I'm sorry, this High Court there, they were still not willing to accept um, some of the recommendations we were making and the plans that we were giving. And so that's the state right now. So you can imagine how it has been for so long. And I think one of the biggest challenges has been the diversity of the ecology. As I showed you, there's 450 species of plants in a shola and 650 species of plants in a grassland. So it takes a lot to understand that and to learn about that, and then it's the complex occurrence of this mosaic, and and there are so many minute niches, wetlands, rocks, and every hill slope is different from the other, and the microclimate is different. So it takes an entire lifetime. It's taken me like 10, 12 years um, to come to where I am now. So with the forest department, they just don't function on those time scales. Like people are shifting, like the the people who are making the decisions come for a maximum of 3 years, and they're moving out, and then there's so much of wildlife here also. So wildlife management is one of their main things, and then there's a huge amount of tourism. So tourism management is another thing. So ecology is almost completely neglected and marginalized, and also utilized um, for income generation and for growing plantations and uh, harvesting wood, although it's not there now in such a large scale, but that's how it has been. And so the shift from that towards taking care of ecology and planting them out and understanding ecology is completely lacking. And Supi, do you want to approach the second question and I can answer it again?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just have a broad comment to make, which is that the hill areas were, occupied and invaded and transformed much later than other parts of, the Deccan Plateau or the plains of Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So it's a fairly recent onslaught. But when, the big plantations started off with the British, and then subsequently the whole economy turned over to these cash crop plantations, it has been, it's one of the most remunerative and also most stable of the agricultural incomes, I think, from, what I understand of what is going on with farmers elsewhere. So the whole cash crop perennial polyculture economy is very profitable. Even, I mean, that being said, of course, it's gone through many ups and downs. So, and it caters to a global market. Coffee, tea, all the products of these hill areas go very, very far. And to me, that is that the economics of this landscape is tied to the cash crop economy. So the other thing is that they are fragile, particularly so at this time when temperatures are rising, and the hill areas are where actually we're witnessing the changes in temperatures most obviously. Elsewhere, we get big changes, big fluctuations with, say, the rainfall regime and so on. But here we're also getting temperature, and we're also getting, the people as well moving to these higher elevations. So everything is migrating, whether it's invasive exotics or human beings or culture or honeymooners or whatever. The hill areas are a premium area right now. So that's kind of the sense that I have as to why they are facing such huge pressures right now.
Yeah.
You?
So, yeah, and also, yeah, thanks for that perspective, Supi, and to also answer a part of Pradeep's question is why are there so many invasive species and why does it become so fragile? I think it's because of the ability of the ecology and the soil and everything, and the amount of water and just the incredible capacity of this landscape to support life, which has gone on like despite a huge amount of pressures. So I think that capacity is what is kind of like taken advantage of, and um, anything that you try and grow here like grows here, like for example, there's this tree called the chincona tree, which is from South America, but then it was found out that it was good for malaria and it had a cure for malaria, and during colonization, when deforestation was happening across the tropics, and malaria started becoming rampant, the colonists also wanted to find a cure for it. So they try to plant chincona trees all over the world in the tropics, but it just didn't pick up in many parts. But in the Nilgiris, it picked up and it grew, and a tree that wouldn't grow in other parts. So like that, like everything that you plant seems to grow here because of the capacity to support life. And it's the capacity to support everything from a completely open grassland to to a completely closed and dense forest. So that's very unusual. And so everything in between that seems to also thrive. So I think that's one of the reasons why um, uh, and I think a shola and a grassland ecology is still quite stable, but one of the reasons why the invasive species have had such a huge presence is because of human disturbance. And um, even lantana, I feel like it's become such a rampant occupation because the forests were were deforested, and uh, the deciduous forests and moist deciduous forests were completely um, logged by the colonists and then later by the forest department and then planted with teak. So whenever there's huge amount of disturbance, then you have invasive species taking over. So similarly, um, human action and disturbance and has been one of the main reasons why the ecologies become fragile.
Yeah, thank you. Pradeep sir, does this answer the question, and do you want to add something more to it, or we move to the next question, please? Looks like we can move to the next question. Meanwhile, I'll request Vijay to ask his question, please. Vijay, sir.
Good evening, sir. Yeah, good evening, sir. My question, there are two questions. One is, where can we find this native species saplings or seeds? And the second question is, what about the status of this Shola grassland in Eastern Ghats?
Okay, so I'm guessing your question with regard to seeds and like a plant stock is in general, not just over here. So you can, I think you can still find them in wherever it is in India. You can still find them in places that have the native ecology remaining. And this would usually be like maybe next to the closest hill or next to an interesting landscape feature like a stream side or a gorge or a canyon or a rocky landscape or in the closest sanctuary or national park or reserve forest. There will be some patches that still remain. So I think all across India there hasn't been much of species extinction in terms of the plant ecology because there are still patches that still remain. So so I think it will be possible to find these places and get the seed stock wherever it is. And Shola grassland ecology, so it occurs in the Western Ghats and in the Nilgiris. So the Nilgiris connects the Western Ghats and the Eastern Ghats. So it does occur, technically it does occur in the Eastern Ghats because it only in the BR Hills, which if you consider it is part of the Eastern Ghats. Sorry, in the not the BR Hills. Oh my God, I forgot the name now. It's slipped my mind. But yeah, it does in the southern part of the Eastern Ghats, but otherwise it doesn't occur in the Eastern Ghats much.
Thank you, sir.
In BRT Tiger Reserve. BRT Tiger Reserve.
Yeah, BRT Tiger Reserve, yeah. Yes, sir, thanks.
Thank you. I guess Sneha has a couple questions. May I request Sneha to ask her question, please?
Good
You know,
evening.
actually, the BRT Tiger Reserve looks like the upper reaches, looks like the younger brother of Nilgiris.
Okay, sir. Yeah, thanks. That's AJT John Singh sir who's answered that question.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Sir, I'm Sneha and I'm a native of the Nilgiris. So currently I'm pursuing Masters in Landscape and we're trying to work with the native species and trying to understand the Shola and the montane grassland ecology. So I heard you talking about the black wattle and the eucalyptus trees, which are normally invasive. We do know about them. But a lot of the Nilgiri rhododendron or even the avol grass and such kind of very rare species are getting extinct. So what's your take on that, sir?
Yeah, there are many species that are extremely endangered, like the avul grass that you mentioned. Was considered extinct at some point, and then we found it in a few wetlands, and in fact, like I've been trying to grow it back and have it in my nursery also. And the problem is also like this grass doesn't flower and seed. So I think we think that it might be a climate change thing, but so like that, there are many species that are really pushed to the boundary, and rhododendron also is one of the plants. It's like really difficult to grow in a nursery, and so yeah, we have to work on all fronts, which is like trying to grow them back as well as like protect what remains, and immediately like stop uh, the development and destruction that's happening in the name of development, and the massive amount of cottages and roads and conversion of plantations that's happening into real estate. So all of that needs to be curbed, and um, yeah.
Thank you, sir. And also with regard to removal of exotic species and planting the native species, what are the criteria that you follow, sir? Like, is there any pollen grain study or anything to find out what exactly was there earlier?
So I don't take up any pollen grain study or any like of those scientific methods, but because like I've been exploring these landscapes and the Shola grassland ecology for quite a bit, like there's also like you can easily assess it by the topographical features and what plants occur at a certain place. Like even with the type of exotic or invasive plants there, you can make out like whether it would have been a Shola or a grassland. So I think like yeah, it comes with also like a bit of practice of looking at the landscape closely for a bit of time.
Thank you, sir.
So the next question is like, what are the criteria and calculations to assess the invasiveness of exotic species?
Okay. So so there are a lot of studies being done here in the Nilgiris also. There are many students, organizations who have studied the invasive species and done mapping and done several plots and tried to assess the invasiveness of the species. So I think that's quite well documented. We have all the information on what's the invasive species and what's the effects of them. The action is where like there's a huge like deficiency, whether it's from the departments or local people, and yeah, so that's the action is where um, that needs a lot of attention.
Okay, thank you. May I request Aishwarya?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
My question is like, what are the major landscape interventions as an architect can bring in, other than like promoting native species? Is there any specific set of designs which can be promoted? And also one more question is there anything like specified guidelines for such ecological restoration processes specified to Nilgiris Shola grasslands, Shola forest and grasslands?
Okay. So any specifications that you can follow is, I mean, if you'd ask me, I would say like try and minimize the amount of built up area and give maximum area for the native vegetation or vegetation, and like maybe 15% and 85% or something like that, or 20% and 80%. And that would be ideal.
Okay,
And
sir.
Anything above that, yeah, I mean, the built up buildings like below up, you won't be able to get that. Yeah, and it's also for the ecology. I feel it not so beneficial as giving as much space as possible, and yeah. Also to look at the slopes carefully, and if there are high slopes, then plant the species accordingly, the native grasses and kurinjis, and try and plant because everyone wants to plant trees and they want to plant it along the fence, and which is not how sholas and grasslands grow, and which is something that I have to tell people, like everyone who wants to come and they want to buy trees or want to take trees, they want to plant it along the fence, and that's not how the shola trees grow, and they won't grow well if it's like that. So so yeah, we'll have guidelines with regard to where a shola can grow, if it's like a depression or where there's more water, and if there's some shade, then it makes more sense to plant a shola forest. Otherwise, like if it's rocky and if the soil is less, then it makes sense to have a grassland ecology. So like that, yeah, there could be several guidelines. And the second question was, can you just remind me?
Sir, it was like, is there any major landscape intervention as an architect can make?
Yeah. And then the next question.
And also I have one more question, sir. It's like, have you had any experience working with Toda landscape?
Yeah, for sure. So
Kindly share some of.
Yeah, so the species that was talked about in the previous question, which is avul, is a Toda grass, and it's the entire like culture and tradition and is of the Toda people is surrounds this grass, and they need it for thatching their temples, um, and it's a very important wetland species. So yeah, we're trying to grow this species back and trying to plant it out in the wetlands. And any type of grassland restoration is also beneficial for the Todas because they are um, pastoralists and they need the grasslands. So yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we move to Vineet Vishal's question, I just wanted to let you know that a lot of people have been looking for the book and they are not finding it on Amazon. So can you let us know where to buy the book from? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I can send a message or something.
Sure.
On the chat box, yeah.
Yeah.
Godwin, I need your email ID.
Yeah, sure. I can share that also on the chat box.
Vineet, can you ask your question next, please?
Thank you, sir. And good evening, sir. It was a wonderful presentation, first of all. And the thing I want to know is, as you said about the Shola, Shola grassland ecosystem, there are any certain ecotourism movements which can promote this Shola grassland, as well as there are more tea estates which has been abandoned throughout the years, so that any preventive measures from government have been taken to recover those lands and turn it into shola grasslands as well as trees?
So yeah, so the ecotourism like interventions, yeah, I am trying that also because some of the projects that I've done is like to try and get people who have lands and to grow the native ecology back, and then they want to have a small ecotourism kind of a setup. So this becomes a model for other people who have these, because there are so many cottages and tourism setups over here. So if the idea is to try and get them to plant the native ecology, and then they can have an ecotourism kind of a setup around it. So that way we can drastically increase the area under native ecology. So we are trying to work on that. And what was the second question?
It was a bunch of a question like any government project which are currently going in such a
Abandoned tea estates and all that. No?
Exactly, sir. That's what.
Yeah. So yeah, there are some abandoned tea estates, but then but the Nilgiris, it's also like the large tea estates are owned by huge corporations or politicians, and they somehow keep the tea estates running. And there aren't so many abandoned tea estates actually. And even the ones that are, like, they either like will get back to tea estate or something like that. So the smaller tea estate owners are selling it and making it into cottages and homes and all. So yeah, we are trying to work out some alternatives for tea also, where other like biodiverse rich plantations that can give income to farmers and small landholders can be worked on. So we're trying to work on those kind of solutions also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
May I request Nish to ask the question?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for your wonderful talk. So I had basically two questions. One, you said that Shola grasslands are like high mountain grasslands, right? So I want to know whether fire. Hello? Yeah, so I want to know whether fire is like naturally part of this high mountain grassland, and how whether if it controls the invasives, or whether it makes it more ideal for the invasiveness, like for the invasive species to propagate. That's my first question. And second question is, since there are indigenous communities here, like how different did they manage the land as opposed to how the forest department is doing now? So yeah.
So the fire aspect is see, right now it's so destroyed, and like there's only so little that remains, that fire is not even an aspect over here. Because initially, when the landscapes were contiguous and the grasslands were contiguous, yes, fire was an important feature and aspect, and it helped rejuvenate the grasses and produce new flush and help the herbivores. And also kind of like, it wasn't the main factor that determined whether grassland or shola occurred, but it was one of the factors, along with frost and everything else. And but now you just don't have enough space for it to burn, and then the forest department cannot afford to let the black bottle or the eucalyptus burn, so they have fire lines and everything, so fire doesn't occur here. But then fire is occurs a lot in the lower parts of the Nilgiris, where there's lantana and the drier forests. And there, yes, like it's been happening constantly, and the lantana hasn't gone away because of that. It just keeps coming back. And I feel like, yeah, it could be a useful tool if there are restoration um, efforts taken up to remove the lantana and plant native grasses, and then maybe if fire occurs, that it could maybe help at some point um, in burning off new growth and exhausting the seed bank and things like that. But right now, without any much intervention and at the current state, it's not making much of a difference. And
Add a few points. I add few points.
Yeah, sure.
You know, in India, most of the fires are man-made actually. Okay. In the grassland habitat, forest department may do little bit of cool season burning to increase the productivity. Last time when I was in the Nilgiris, when I came into this Mukurti National Park, the fire from the Kerala side, you know, the lower area, it had burnt a lot of area. So that way, no, I mean, it's possible for the fire to come from the drier tracks, and particularly in summer, they can get into the Nilgiris. That can, a lot of areas got burnt. I got some nice pictures also of that burnt area actually. But fires are largely man-made, and forest department, they try to use some, you know, for habitat management. Thank you.
So, yeah, thanks for that. And what was the second question? Sorry.
No, the second question was how different is it compared to like how the indigenous community used to manage the land, yeah, versus the forest department.
It's completely like polar opposite. And yeah, so the indigenous people, everything like from wanting to live on the land and wanting the species to continue, and the level of extraction, and yeah, the main thing is like, yeah, the fact that people can be part of the ecology and live along with it, and whereas the other model is a fortress model where people have to be outside of it, and then ecology, plant ecology isn't given so much importance, and it's mostly wildlife and tourism and things like that. So on many levels, it's a polar opposite, yeah.
So I hope it answers your question. Can we move to the next one by Vanya?
Muted. Yeah. Hello, Vasant. Really good to see you. And yeah, and I was just wondering if you've got any plans to involve the children in the schools like Glenmorgan and the little tiny Shola there that has gone. Is there sort of ones that you say you're working with other people and?
Yeah, the idea is to work with many of the schools, and in fact, we're trying to work out a program where we can work with all the 700 schools in the Nilgiris and focus on hands-on education-based, action-based education, and yeah, so yeah, the intention is that I haven't worked with that particular school in Glenmorgan though yet. But yeah, and it's great to see you, and thanks for coming, being part of this. Vanya has, hi. So Vanya has been like a guide initially to me when I came here to the Nilgiris, and she had set up a beautiful organic farming initiative and practice, and really loves the Nilgiris a lot. So when I came here first, she helped me a lot in understanding the issues and many parts of the landscape also.
It's really good to see you. I was just going to say I got the book today, And
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah,
Great.
so it took a bit longer than we thought. And the other thing
Yeah.
was just a small sort of, I know that we talked about the way the toaders had the quick burn, which didn't really damage the plants. And they controlled it from the hilltops when they, in the ritual, when every year. So, but when it was left and they were stopped burning the quick burn, the dead grasses built up. And when the forest department came along to do, or when an accidental burn happened, it went right into the roots of the grasses and the plants, so that you actually destroyed them. And I think we've talked about this, haven't we? It's just very interesting, like you said, the polar opposite. You know,
Exactly.
forest department and way it works when the quick burn is lost.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And initially also, like there were natural fires that occurred in a grassland. Like there are these episodes called dry lightnings that happen in the dry season. And they used to cause fires in the grassland. And so there were natural fires also, and they weren't very, like a very low intensity, because it was just the tillers of the grasses that were burning. But like you said, right now with the amount of biomass and highly flammable trees like wattle, it burns very intensely and kills everything in the ground.
Well, thank you for all you're doing. You're absolutely wonderful. I'm so impressed. Thank you, Vasant.
Thanks, Vanya.
Blessings. Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have, I guess, the last question from Parul Sethi, and then I would request Aditya to just take it over.
Hi, that's actually a question from me. Some of us are looking at this presentation together. Thank you, Vasant, for the fascinating presentation and for bringing the Shola grassland ecology to us in Delhi over here. What I want to ask is, can you actually, a couple of questions. One is, can you explain a little bit about teaching, how you taught yourself about the native plants of Shola grasslands, because you don't have a background in botany, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. And the second question I have is, you said you work with some landscape architects, right, in certain projects where there are some plants, some portions of the plantations which have ornamental plants as well. How did you make peace with that? I mean, do you sort of have a process where like, okay, it's okay to plant a few ornamental trees, but also preserve a part of the ecology in certain places?
Yeah. Sorry. It's getting a bit dark, so I'll just shift my. Yeah. So how I learned about this was, yeah, just go out in the field and try and identify. That's how it starts. And I had a lot of people who helped me also, like Suprabha was there, and there were some people here like who knew some of the species also. So I approached them, and then there were flora books, and then I used to make collections and take it to the Botanical Survey of India in Coimbatore. And yeah, so slowly I started learning about the species, and I think writing about it and also taking photos and drawing helps a lot, especially drawing. When you try and draw it, it really like helps a lot in learning. So that's one useful technique, I think. And yeah, when you try and communicate it also, because like for me, as I was learning, you also get to see that it's being destroyed and it's in such a bad state. So you're trying to communicate it. So in that time also you learn about it a lot.
Right.
And so yeah, working on these projects where other ornamentals are also involved. Like initially, I was like, no, this is not possible. I'm not going to do this. Like I'm just going to focus on restoration and all that. But then, like I thought that okay, it wasn't moving so easily. Like restoration projects are difficult to organize. You got everything has to work out from the land and the funding and the resources to take care of it and maintenance and everything. But then there seemed to be like it's smoother when you make some compromises. So that's how I started taking that up, and then realized that as long as you're not working with other invasive species, it's okay. And we're just trying to improve the native biodiversity, and then the scale is important, because if we can do this across the entire Nilgiris, then it's great. So yeah.
Thank you. I just have one more follow-up question.
Yeah.
You've done quite a bit of projects, at least the ones you showed us on this presentation. Are you doing all of this alone, or do you have a team now that you work with, or is it?
Yeah, no, I'm doing it alone only. I don't have a team. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming on a weekday evening, and I request Aditya to just give the vote of thanks. And Vasant sir, it was really an eye opener. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Vasant. This is a wonderful talk. Really enjoyed it. And it was really enjoyable to hear you and explain all your variety of projects you've done. It was really interesting to see how many different types of projects you've been working on, the efforts you made, and thank you again.